put into it that you're talking about.
Yeah. Michael, the welcome to the Regeneration Podcast. I've got a question for you that I think you just came to the microphone looking like you're out of breath, but there's this new thing you see on Twitter, at least I've seen a lot of it this week, not necessarily new. It's this phenomenon where people say, like, I was today years old when I realized some
Oh
people
yeah.
have, I was today years old. So one of them, and I didn't want to open it because you get stuck in these things, you gotta like back out 50 times. But it was, I was today years old when I realized Goofy wasn't a dog.
Goofy's not a dog.
No, but so I didn't want to open it because I knew how you open them. Yeah. Let me quickly ask our guest. Any insight into that, Brandon? Then I want to double back to Michael. Is Goofy not a dog? And if not, what the hell is Goofy?
I tend to stay away from these difficult existential questions, so I've not encountered this one.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's a wormhole. It's a wormhole. But maybe I'll have to open that one up. I just thought, Michael, you've got your finger on the pulse frequently. You are coming in exhausted, Michael. Tell me about it.
I'm not exhausted. It's been working my ass off. But
Okay.
well, I'm teaching that course on Rosicrucianism.
How's it going?
Great. I mean, I got really smart people from across the world, actually.
Who do I know? I'm sure I know one or two of your students. They'd be listeners, maybe, or camarados from Jesus.
Oh, Daniel Polikoff is one.
Okay, well, yeah.
And is there anybody else that you know?
This Daniel Polikoff, Brandon, is quite a speaker in his own right. He's, yeah.
And what a poet.
Yeah.
He actually recently sent me a poem.
He wrote this masterful biography of Rilke. Okay.
Interesting. We were talking about Novalis too.
Okay. I saw your blog post on that, your Substack.
That was mind-blowing, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Michael had a similar horoscope to Novalis, this great German romantic poet who died young.
I mean, it's not even, I mean, it's spooky how much overlap there was.
And does having one day apart in birthdays, does that produce any chance of that type of alignment? To an outsider who doesn't know much about it.
The sun was going to be around there anyway, but
yeah.
The thing is, it wasn't the sun, it was almost all the other planets.
Interesting.
Close to each other.
And Rudolf Steiner claimed that Novalis was the reincarnation of John the Baptist.
That's all I'm saying.
That's all I'm saying. Talk about Rosicrucianism. Our guest, let me tell you how I met him. Shortly after Hurricane Katrina, his name is Brandon Gaylord. I'm running the Catholic campus ministry at SUNY Geneseo. And the school had been organizing some relief trips down there. And I was organizing one, I think, just from the Catholic community. And then the vice president of student life called up and said, why don't you just go with the college? And I did. And there was some members from the Newman community, and then, but also just a group. And the first night we arrive in Biloxi after flying through New Orleans, driving east, arriving at night. I'm outside this kind of boy, I forget where we stayed. Was it this place, Brandon, like a shelter where the roll-offs of Little People Big World had stayed? Was that your year?
Yeah, it looked like a commune.
Okay.
Yeah, I just remember feeling like this was not very well thought out.
That's great. But we did good work. But the two things I remember, one is that when I met Brandon, he was outside the first night, and you were mentioning, Michael, Rosicrucianism. He was reading Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope. And we started talking about that some people think is a masterwork of, he's a Georgetown guy, very serious. But anybody who wants to talk about permanent Washington or the deep state, they're reading Carol Quigley. And they say, Bill Clinton was a student of him and so forth. The other thing, Brandon, which still makes me laugh when I think about it is
Jesuit school, right?
Yeah.
What is with the Jesuits, man?
It's weird. Well, they, Edmund Walsh was this great Jesuit leader. He had his hands in everything geopolitical. So I'm just saying, you Google Edmund Walsh.
Well, Georgetown is like, it's like ground zero for that kind of political science stuff.
Yeah.
Which makes you think all the conspiracy theories are true about the Jesuits.
Well, it's also the Jesuits have this great history of diplomacy, right? Because they were an international order. That goes certainly back to the
kicked out of the Catholic Church. Yeah.
But that other thing, Brandon, I remember is we'd be working on a house, repairing it, and we had Biloxi is next to an Air Force base, and people would be working on a house, and Brandon and I would do these made up things about the airplanes flying overhead as if we knew the intimate details of fighters, and we just pull a name out of our ass, and I'd say, Brandon, yeah, Mike, Are you hearing an R24 with maybe a little combustion problem in the number 2 engine? And he would say, yeah, sure do, Mike. And every other student there believed. Do you remember that, Brendan?
Yeah, what I remember was, excuse me, spending roughly $1,000. Say that about 20 of us students who go down there, and you saying, so you take all the students together, it's about $20,000 for total investment to go down here, to have a bunch of students who don't know how to use a hammer or a paintbrush pretend to contribute. What if we just like told the students to keep half their money and give the other half to a contractor down here who knows what they're doing, and think of the good we could do? And I remember being down there and
yeah,
thinking, that's a brilliant idea, but it's also too late for ideas like
Oh,
that.
you're saying you heard it from me?
Yeah, I heard it
Yeah,
from
yeah,
you.
because
I
that's
was
Ivy
like,
Knowledge through and through. There's a famous essay, "To Hell with Good Intentions." Now, again, if you could go
Right.
to get around that, some people go on service projects where you go to Haiti and you just allow yourself to be hosted by the family. So you realize your powerlessness, that you're going to learn more than the people.
Oh, instead of the Messiah complex version,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm here to save you,
yeah.
or impoverished Black people.
So that was cool. Yeah, go ahead, Brandon. Yeah.
Well, and that's really where you sort of introduced me to the idea of localism. And we're flying 2,000 miles or so to go help people, and there's poor people up in Rochester, poor people in Buffalo. I mean, poor people everywhere, and people who need assistance everywhere. And maybe we can do better work by just staying home and repairing the wall in our own backyard as opposed to seeking it out.
I think we can. Yeah, and then part of me has a soft spot. That the exotic service project still can have a role to change hearts and to make community and so forth. But yeah, those are my inclinations. But the worst would be this notion that I remember even like the thing for the March for Life in Washington. You could take yourself too seriously, but we used to joke about like the number of babies we're saving with every step, right? That it's also, we like being here, but it's kind of a both and. But yeah, there's people, and I think we would all agree with this, there's people who make it their life just doing service project after service project and like hanging with young people. And my wife used to be the volunteer coordinator for Habitat for Humanity International, out of Americus, Georgia. And you just had these people who just were always doing that, right? But
is it like social justice tourism? Is that what it's like?
Yeah. What do you think about it? I have a soft spot for it. I don't do it too much, and I do like the Illichian approach. But there's a human part of me too that says I've seen lives changed by doing little things like that. In community.
To me, it's just so
where you reflect.
It's just so self-serving, though. It's just so self-serving. I mean, like I live in a city now in Arizona where there's homelessness and there's poverty, and kids are still doing service learning trips to places like Biloxi and all these places, and it's like, just go out back. There's people who need you right there. Go buy
right in the corner where you live,
and give it to a homeless person. Yeah, and I think it's hard to get away from the idea that you're doing it simply for your own self-gratification. And if you need to fly 2,000 miles to understand that there's poverty in the world, I think that says more about you than the other people.
But I'm saying sometimes we do. Like G.K. Chesterton's whole corpus is based upon almost exactly that. He has to go around the world to discover his wife again, who looks like a stranger, and then he falls in love. Or that we could go on these things from a distance. Like I love that song from Into the Woods, There Are Giants in the Sky. When you get in an airplane, you climb the bean tree and you see her home and it looks so exotic again. That's the hope. That's what I'm saying. I have a soft spot for it. Are you right? Yes. But I'm trying to say that some of the impulses behind these things aren't just the spawn of Satan.
Well, I agree, but
Michael,
Geneseo is a college made up of students from New York City and Rochester. So the idea that they're not exposed to poverty before they get to our rural, agrarian college.
I know. I'm saying they need to see it sometimes from a distance to get it. Sometimes they need to see it from a distance to get it, or romanticize a little bit. Michael, you're a poet. What do you think?
I never understood that.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to go far to find people suffering and poverty.
Agreed.
And you certainly don't need to go hundreds of miles away.
Yeah.
So I never got that. I mean, my kid, even like the March for Life.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I get it, but usually it's a bunch of kids going, and very often it's like, I remember seeing an interview with John Mellencamp of all things, and he was talking about protesting in Washington, D.C. when I was like 20. He said, yeah, we were protesting and we were there for doing that. But besides that, it was a big party.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? People are drinking a lot of beer and smoking a lot of marijuana.
So I
But
would, again, on that
yeah,
one, and I've written about this at Front Porch. Again, I get it all, and the soft spot, because there's good people there, is I wrote an article and I invoked Wallace Stevens. You're walking around the Mall of Washington. That truth depends on a walk around the lake. That to take some students to see politics, messy bedfellows. My thing is not showing pictures of dissembled babies as my lead. My thing is not even Cardinal Keeler showing a baby in utero on the screen in the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. I've got Illichian sympathies there too, but I take students and I talk about strange bedfellows. There's kind of a serenity of peace, but I do want to say, if our listeners understand, I lead. What we've done is we've reversed it. We've made the far primary and the local secondary. I can talk comfortably on this. Doesn't mean I'm right. Is that my whole corpus of writings at Front Porch is begin local, but sometimes that kind of experience to see things from a distance, to get messed up, provided it doesn't become an end to itself. I've seen some good fruits from it, but it's become its own industry. And so I have to say, along with you, Michael, I don't necessarily get it.
yeah, it's an industry now.
It is an industry. Let me introduce our guest too, which I haven't done. Brandon Gaylord. That's how I met him. You're going to describe yourself. I kind of brought him on for something we've done several times thus far. And you just engage somebody. I've used some different students, one time my son, and a little bit of this idea of a younger generation, but also, Brandon, last time we touched base, you would kind of re-engage with scripture. You might tell a little bit about your journey. I also want to talk about education. You have a lot of thoughts on education. Mm-hmm. And instead of bringing somebody on with a theme kind of like ours, talking to people, seeing like how the Regeneration podcast plays in Peoria, what's working for you in life when you look at the church, Protestant, Catholic, or neither. What are you seeing? What's turning you off? These are some of the things we're going to talk about. So kind of describe who you are, Brandon, and welcome to the Regeneration podcast.
Great. Thank you. So Mike and I met when I was attending Geneseo. From there, I went grad school and taught for a number of years, ran for state office in New York State. I don't know if you knew that, Mike, but
I followed the campaign.
Okay, came in a close second,
Yeah.
but there's no prize for second place, which is fine. But that's really where I sort of got re-energized with my faith, because I found myself, knocking door to door and getting questions in Hudson Valley asking me my stance on abortion. And that's, I'm always trying to be authentic. I was described as perhaps too honest for politics, which is a compliment that I'll take with me. But it was along those lines that I really sort of re-engaged with my faith. I see a lot of myself in Paul or Saul of Tarsus, the idea of the sinner who's touched and saved. And so that's kind of how I view myself. Recently, my family and I moved from New York to Arizona.
He's got a newborn, Michael, 12 weeks old. Is that right? Or 5?
16 days old.
Oh gosh,
16 days old, and our first son is 2 years old as of yesterday. So
congratulations.
Thank you. We moved the family down here. We're about 20 minutes from my folks now in Arizona. So just getting used to it. I'm not teaching anymore. I'm working in a different field, local government, actually, Mike.
Wow, way to go.
So that's been really good. And my job, I'm very much blessed. I have the best job ever. We work local government. We're very responsive. We actually help people. And when it's quiet around here, I work with 2 other people and we do Bible study at work, which is fantastic.
It's like Christian Parks and Recreation.
It's amazing. It's amazing because I've got my laptop on top of my Bible right now to sort of prop it up, but we'll do Bible study and talk about these heavy issues, politics and whatever, in an environment where normally that's not allowed. So it's really been great.
Yeah, so this is kind of like open season then. Michael, what first strikes you? Like, there's a couple of questions I want to ask Brandon just from what he said. Brandon's an intelligent guy. Talk to him, ask him his motives for anything.
No, so yeah, so what what is it that woke you up when you were in politics in New York?
Well, it was the abortion question. I think for me, becoming a new father 2 years ago was very, very sobering. I was teaching in a school at the time, and I went to grad school at Harvard. So I sort of have been very close to the sort of woke movement from an outsider perspective looking in. But getting that question at the door and telling people, look, I don't think abortion's right. I think it's wrong in every aspect. I also think that the state should decide on it on a state by state basis. I think people should be able to vote with their dollars. But just finding myself having to justify that position a lot really gave me a chance to clarify how I feel on it. And then, going home and looking at my son and saying, how could I ever support something that would result in the destruction of this life? I mean, it's just, it is not something that I agree with. I know everybody's got a different opinion on it, but that's what really pushed me toward a sort of renewal of faith. Where we were living at the time, I didn't like the local Catholic Church. Mike might get mad at me for saying that.
Get mad at you for saying that?
And then,
It's going to hell. Jesus is
exactly.
mad at you for saying that. Yeah.
My fate's sealed. But I just felt that God's been calling us ever since we got out here. Local radio has Christian broadcasting out here, and met up with one of the local pastors, and we live about a half mile from each other, and his family's come over for dinner. And just a lot of these sort of things have fallen into place where before it felt like I was Catholic, but on an island, very far removed. You might go to church for 45 to 60 minutes a week, and then you go back, and then you're sort of on your own. And so I found a strong community here that's really working for me.
Well, that's a lot here. Yeah.
So Michael will probably remember this. So several years ago, 6-7 years ago. So I'm pretty pro-life myself, and I was getting into it heatedly through social media with all these woke.
I'm not sure I remember this. I'm listening closely. Yeah, go ahead.
Remember all the woke Catholics, right?
Yeah.
I would get into it with them, and I'm like, what am I even talking to these people for? And most of them write for Pathos Catholic. I just want you to know.
Okay.
And it was stunning to me that these people could give you the pious Catholicism spiel and still be in support of abortion, or at least of a woman's right to choose, or something. And it's pathological as far as I'm concerned.
We could stay on abortion and the Bible for the whole episode. Yeah, that's great.
I used to press people. They'd say, "Oh, I support a woman's right to choose," and I'd say, "Choose what? What are we choosing here?" "Oh, choosing what to do with their body." Okay, well, at the same time you're calling it their body, you're also describing a fetus as a parasite that leeches off a mother. This is an argument the left makes a lot, and so it's like you can't really have both. And what I found, Mike and I used to talk humanities a lot in Geneseo, and what I find is the more that the language is controlled by, I think, fake Catholics, the worse things become. And so you've got where we can't define what a woman is, and all these other silly things that I'm like, I'm, as Rush used to say, I'm a literalist. If you tell me you're a woman, I believe you're a woman. I don't think it changes day by day. And so I found myself like sort of racking my head against insanity everywhere I looked in upstate New York, running for political office, thinking that there was enough sanity to win. But it's just sort of interesting the way things are going out there.
Yeah, it's disconcerting.
Let me ask you, Brandon. So on like the abortion issue, I have to, on Sunday afternoon, I'm going to a parish in the diocese to kind of speak. In the department I run, the Office of Life Issues is one of them. And probably got to give like a 5-minute kind of fervorino on the pro-life. But we had a guest on a few weeks ago. It was Wilhelm and Sally. Remember them, Michael? And Sally, this is again kind of comes from my hero Ivan Illich, but I think it's common sense too, is that so much of the language that we use for defending a baby in the womb plays in this language of like individual human rights, right? And we show a baby in utero. And the notion, I think we kind of framing it in that way, sometimes framing it in murder too, I think is missing it. I think it's probably more the Fourth Amendment than thou shalt not kill. Honor thy father and thy mother. So in the Catholic Church, we have an anthropology that we're persons in communion, right? That you're an individual, Brandon, but you're also part of a unity of other people in the body of Christ. And so,
Paul talks about that in Ephesians.
Yeah. So one thing is like Simone Weil said, human rights don't exist in the absence of human obligations, but we tend to, when things water down to human rights, it's usually just clamoring for more, but the other one is that when we frame the thing in, the right of the baby to life, we're using a false anthropology that eventually redounds upon us. That if we saw that like society needs to protect everything to do with the mother-child relationship, like Chesterton said, the halo surrounds them both. Separate, or even psychologists, they look when a baby comes out of the womb, they, the lens of competitive individualism just doesn't work. It's a mother-child system. I don't like that system language at all because it mechanizes it. But how do you frame this question? You heard me say that, kind of more about, so if we had to change the world, Chesterton, I can kind of evoke him on something he did with the lice epidemic when he said like a mother's love for her daughter's hair, he would flip the world. Like if we have to, they were cutting the daughter's hair because of this lice. It wasn't happening to the elites. It was just happening to the poor. He said, if we have to protect the mother and the daughter, we need to have, rents that are affordable. If we need rents that are affordable, we need to outlaw usury. If we need to outlaw usury, we got to bring down this. And he did a revolution of the whole world, and I find that very appealing. How do you frame the issue? And I want to talk about the Bible too, how you frame that thing. Go ahead.
How do I
Does that
frame
make
the
sense?
issue of abortion
Yeah,
being
is
wrong?
most of the language in the way you think about it, when you use default language, is it like,
Yeah,
this
I
baby
think,
has a right to life?
yeah, I mean, I think I don't frame it that way. And Rush used to say again that he's a literalist, and I think that if you're saying things like, it's a human right, I think it's sort of a slippery slope. There's a professor out of Stanford, I forget his name, I think he's a neurobiologist, who said that there is no such thing as free will. We need to outlaw this idea. This is very recent. And he
Yeah.
said that, and I forget exactly the examples he was giving, but it was very interesting. And I think it's a slippery slope because I think you can't in one sense say that we have human rights and therefore I ought to be able to kill a child if I so choose to. And at the same time say there is no such thing as free will. And I think that's really where we come into a lot of problems. I also think too, there's a sense that we're missing out on um, the soul of the mother. I mean, I have known a couple of women who have gotten abortions. I don't know any of them personally who are happy about it. I don't know any of them personally who are glad they did it. And then the way I always framed it is there are a ton of people who, for whatever reason, God has not allowed them to have children. And there are a ton of people who would love to adopt a child. And I think in this country, we need to be linking people who want to adopt with people who are maybe not super happy about being pregnant. Because at the same time that we're killing babies, we're, letting our society prohibit other people who want babies from having them. And I think that we're really missing out on a big opportunity there. So that's the way I used to frame it is, I'm not going to tell you what you need to do, but I think that we need to make adoption significantly easier so we can link people together.
And adoption has not only not become easier, it's become more difficult and more expensive over time, right?
Yeah.
Say more
I
about
saw a
that,
thing that
Michael.
said
Like what's that development?
$75,000.
Wow. Is most of those fees just under the ideas of like the paperwork associated or?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
The other thing that undergirds it, I mean, there's such and there's such a disconnect because there is such intellectual dishonesty about what a child in the womb is, because as we know, if it's wanted, say you're 3 months pregnant, you get the ultrasound and goes up in the refrigerator, and there's that baby, right? And if it's not wanted, it's a parasite, or right, it's other. And how does that happen? It's so intellectually dishonest, and I call people on it all the time. That this one person I knew who was ostensibly Catholic, who was about as pro-choice as you can get, and that her daughter gets pregnant, and I said, "Let me guess, you're like," she got excited that she was going to be a grandmother. I said, "Well, I'm glad you're excited, but do you have a picture of do you have the ultrasound on the fridge?" "Yes." I said, "You already have a name?" "Yes."
Brandon, what would you think about, again, even in this kind of, for me, this kind of Chestertonian revolutionary take, like you have one thing that, having been involved through the campus ministry part of my life, the notion that students like who are in the right to life movement don't care about the mother prior to or after delivery is crazy. That's kind of gone. Now, the students, again, they're marching. I've never met one in the last 15 years that wasn't marching vociferously for that too. But, we have the right to life is seen as kind of conservative in this country. And I think that isolates it. There's feminists for life and everything, and they're wonderful. But like Viktor Orban again, I guess, where I think the issue isn't just saying we're going to take care of them, but what do you think about, like, if we made the mother-child relationship central, that when women have babies that they get, paid leave for 3 years, things like that? Or where do you stand just as somebody who had their foot in politics? Does that feel dirty to you? Orban is so popular with certain people here, the post-liberals, is that changing the way they look at some of these issues too? I think there's, again, I always work from a blueprint of surplus, not scarcity. Everybody's so worried there's not enough to go around, right? Once we flip them, yeah.
This is the same.
That's when you.
We're over.
There's not enough. There's really not enough. We need to elbow people out of the way.
You talked me out of my economics double major by saying scarcity is a stupid concept.
It's a stupid concept, really stupid.
I think that. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, people talk about scarcity. I mean, my gosh, a friend of ours just came this afternoon to get 6 bushel baskets full of vegetables because we have so much left over in our garden.
Yeah, the amount of produce thrown out by Wegmans in Rochester.
But the thing is, we've all been conditioned by the scarcity baloney and the overpopulation lie since childhood.
The overpopulation lie and interest, right? That money becomes scarce, and you owe more as time clicks. So then time becomes scarce, right? If you think of interest, it creates reified time. Tick, 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 you're losing money. Then time becomes scarce. Chronos is, dominant. Kairos is fled for the hills. And then we're foobarred. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I think there are studies because, it's always the health and safety of the mother. And I've been there for 2 births from our children, and thank God everything went fine. But there are studies where people, they state the way in which they got pregnant, and self-admitted rape or incest, thank God, is a tiny percentage in the US. And there are a lot of young people who will openly admit that they get abortions simply as a way of birth control. And I think, the idea that it's the health of the mother, that's an antiquated argument. And I think that if you accept that, as I do, that it's an antiquated argument, no longer relevant, you have to look at it and say the only reason that we're still tolerating the sort of pro-abortion crowd is because we're too afraid to take a stand against people who are unwilling to take personal responsibility for what they do behind closed doors. I don't really think we should be rewarding people for getting pregnant, but I also think the feminist movement has killed the idea of the beauty of motherhood. And I think that the idea that you can go out and have a career and be a mother. Look, my wife tried it. She's hyper educated, insanely smart scientist, and it's incredibly difficult. And I would argue basically impossible. I think you need to choose one or the other. And I think that the more that we kill the idea of motherhood as a calling, the more that we demean life and allow for things like abortion as birth control to take place.
Well, yeah. Very cool. Let's I'm gonna shift now, like, because again, you're talking about your Bible studies. I'm just going with what you give me. So
go for it.
You and this is not apologetics thing, but for a Catholic, the notion that like, what's your understanding of the Bible? Lately, it's been almost probably 6 months, but my last article at Front Porch Republic on a little thing I did on a religionless church was this thought that, and people, the listeners have heard it, that you can make a case as a Catholic the canon isn't totally unmitigatedly closed. Who you can use for that, Michael, is Novalis, your buddy here. Mm-hmm. That which came first, the church or the New Testament, is one that kind of colors the way I look at it. And also when Jesus said, so much more could be written, that that there's things even in the New Testament, that I'm saying, my hero, John Calper-Powys, said, only in the story of the Good Samaritan do you get this, do you kind of rid yourself for a moment of all these good things you do, because there's a prickly God kind of looking over your shoulder saying, do this or you're going to be in trouble. that can we even evolve in our Christianity 2,000 years after the incarnation, so we could say, like, why are we praying to the God of thunderbolts and not the victims of thunderbolts? Why are we blessed? Why do we do this for somebody? Blessed are this, so this could happen. Why can't we just do the right thing for doing the right thing? So some of that leads me to believe that, like, the Bible is inspired, it's holy. I think it was compiled by, the different gospels and so forth. All of a sudden, they're looking at the Jesus we meet in the Eucharist and so forth. How are you using scripture in your life? And I don't want to denigrate anything whatsoever.
I thought Guido was your hero. I'm getting mixed things from you, sir.
Yeah.
I struggle. So I'm doing, a reread through as people do, very slowly, marching through Numbers right now. And then I'll jump around to different letters from Paul.
You're never going to get through Numbers. Let me tell you, it's the worst.
I'm on Numbers 27. I'm okay. Almost there. But I struggle. And one thing that I mentioned to you the other day that I struggle with is, especially to me, and I hate the whole the rapture is happening, you need to get saved kind of crowd of sort of modern day preachers. But I look at what's happening now and it's just sort of terrifying. And I think it's partly because I'm a father now, but I'm sort of wondering, what does the Bible say a good Christian ought to do in 2023 in light of so much obvious evil and destruction and denigration of life? I mean, Sound of Freedom characterized what's been there for a long time. We're 75 miles or so north of the border, which is wide open, and human traffickers bring people across all the time. And I just, for me, I look at it and I say, where does the Bible tell me what I should be doing as a good Christian in the face of evil? Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Okay, but what about people who are suffering? I can go out and be a good father and a good husband and provide and be, faithful in all this. But there are people potentially down the road who are experiencing, traumatic things. And one of the things I'm really struggling with, Mike, that I mentioned to you the other day is, what does a good Christian, a good Catholic do in 2023? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm looking at Michael. I'm punting. No, just kidding. Michael, you have nothing there.
Yeah, Psalm 82. That's what a good Catholic does, or a good Christian does. Defend the poor and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and needy, deliver the poor and needy, rid them out of the hands of the wicked. And you can't be afraid, right? Well, how many times does Jesus say, why were you afraid? Or be not afraid? And that's what I have noticed. And I think that's what happened. I'm just assuming, but it surely seems like the case, is that the woke Catholics over at Patheos got afraid of, they were afraid of not being invited to the cool kids table anymore. And they joined the majority, right? And people are afraid to speak. And we saw this through COVID, right? People are afraid to say what they really think, and actually to voice to give voice to the whisperings of the Holy Spirit that's within them, that says something's wrong and they don't say it's wrong. Mm-hmm. Right? This is what we're dealing with, right? And that's, I don't have that affliction, but not to my credit either. But I think this is what you see throughout the culture, is it's a cult, it's capitulation on one side, and it's demonic subversion on the other. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw this, but I was just shocked today. Chris Altieri, Mike.
Yeah.
He's been in Rome. He's a reporter for the Catholic World Report, and he just did this one on the Father Rupnik thing.
Yeah, that seems to be the villain du jour.
Unbelievable, and the Pope just reinstated him. Mm-hmm. I mean, oh my God, and why? And it just, I mean,
so what's the solution though? What do we do? That's what I struggle with. I mean,
reject them. Yeah. Walk with your, vote with your feet, and this is what I was talking, who was I talking to? This is what happened under the I was talking to one of the people in my class is an Episcopalian priest from California. and he knows what I think because I don't hold back. And he said that on during COVID, when they shut down the churches for 2 years, that he actually made an arrangement with a Catholic convent down the street to let him do liturgy in their garden, even though his bishop told him not to offer liturgy, right? And I didn't, and I told him, I said, man, it makes me feel so good to hear that. But you know what? I know a lot of priests. I don't know one who did that besides you.
Mm.
You know, um, because the part of the power structure, the way it is, it's a control mechanism. And this is what happened with me is and having young children at home still. I mean, they're almost 13 and 15, but at the time that started, they were 10 and 13, 10 and 12. And I go, well, I mean, they can't go to church on Easter or any other day for how long? And no one's doing anything. There are no priests. They're always saying, nope, I can't do this. It's against the gospel. Did Jesus ever, when lepers approached Jesus, did he say, well, are you vaccinated? So,
but even still, I absolutely agree. I mean, but
I'm sorry, I'm on a rant.
No, it's good.
I am on a lot of these, Mike would call them conspiracy websites because they're a lot of fun to look at. And it's like, when's the Civil War going to break out? I had a friend who said, what do you think is going to happen 2024? I said, I think the election's going to be stolen again. The American people are going to lament that it was stolen again, and they're going to go about their day. And like I lived in New York, like Mike does, and I posted a thing the other day. Never forget that during COVID, you could go to the strip clubs and Walmart, but you couldn't go to church.
Yep.
And
there was some duplicity there.
Where are the
absurd.
Catholics?
Yeah.
Where are the Christians? I mean,
we didn't show up.
We lament the sort of foolishness of going and fighting in the Crusades, given that it was really sort of based on a land grab. But it's like, well, at least the Christians fought. At least they did something. Here we're going, I can't be bothered to go to church because I'm told not to by the government. Are you serious right now? What kind of soft religion is this?
Well, yeah, and that's what I decided to, and Mike knows this, because I've been writing about it for a few years now, is eventually we got to the point I said, I was really outraged when the bishop said, well, we're going to reinstitute the Sunday obligation now because we feel like it. I'm like, you bastards.
Yeah.
You sold you got better than 30 pieces of silver, but you got something, right? So, and as Guido said, right, basically they got the message from the powers above them that said, okay, you guys play ball with us, and we'll let the sex scandal stuff go away.
Yeah, I was in a church service one time. It was great. The homily was great, and it was I forget the exact term, but it was a guy who was going through the process of becoming a priest, and he's a former like stock trader in Manhattan, just like no holds barred. And he said, for we can always sell God, but we can never buy him. And I was like, that's a line that's going to stick with me.
Yeah.
But I get frustrated that I went to a Catholic church, a Franciscan church out here recently. And near the end, it's let's offer up prayers for our community and this, that, and the other. And for those who are seeking asylum, let's be open and open our doors and our hearts to them. And I went, wait a minute, what are we doing here? The trafficking that's taking place, the abuse that's taking place. There are people, you can read about it in local Arizona news, who die every single day trying to cross the desert by traffickers, by coyotes. And yet I don't see, it's just very frustrating. I was talking to
explain the exact difference. So you're saying, you're praying for asylum seekers. Would you have, I could see myself praying for that, but you're saying it's kind of missing the issue. Not that asylum seekers are bad, but we should be praying to like get some control so there's not these horrors going on at the border. Like,
I think we're adding water onto the boat.
Okay,
we're adding water onto the boat. We're stinking. I think the church and the idea of nation states, in my opinion, is sort of at odds. And perhaps I'm wrong in this, Mike. You can sort of correct me, but
the nation state it's the most deadly thing in the world. It should be dying in our time. We need kind of local, regional, Rochester, Detroit. You know, it's city states that have always produced the culture, things you could walk across in a day or two at the max. But the nation state, you know, our friend William Cavanaugh, who is on this thing since the French Revolution, at the French Revolution, ask somebody in Brittany, you know, do you know the nation of France? They're not going to say they do. You know, I'm Breton, right? But this thing came, it's been really, really, really bloody. It's its own religion. This is where the post-liberals are right. It's its own religion, the nation state. How do we define a nation state? It is that entity that has a monopoly on violence in a certain geographical territory. And as we're seeing play out in the Middle East, the nation state, I hope it dies quick. We need small city states, things like that in regions. We need larger confederations. What do you think on that, Mike? Yeah.
That's the threshold moment we're at, though, right?
Yeah.
I was actually speaking with this, I can't remember who it was. So you actually mentioned the nation state. So what I've been working on this intro to Novalis for an Angelico Press.
What was his and Goethe's position on German unification? A friend just asked me that today. I would say their temperaments would be against it, right? You know, Bismarck and Goethe had nothing in common. One was all left brain, one was.
I don't know any place where, I don't think it was an issue for them.
Okay.
What it was an issue for them was Napoleon, who was basically, he was the World Economic Forum of that period. But the thing is, at that time, so because Weimar and Saxony and were separate city states still at that point.
Sure.
It was a
Russia.
much more fluid society, even in just Germany, right?
Yeah.
But after Napoleon, that's when with the rise of the city state, because they're trying to protect themselves against a strong man, for one thing, right? Don't let that happen again. But the other part of it, and I think that was a kind of a threshold moment.
Absolutely was. All the great culture was coming from that part, like small city states. It was going to be it could have been another ancient Greece or ancient Rome where you had the city states. Germany was producing everything of culture at that time, you know, light years ahead of everybody else.
And now we're at another threshold moment. And the thing is, at threshold moments, you never know which way they're going to go. So at this one, as
you're supposed to use the trendy word inflection point, Michael. So 1 point off here.
When I wrote Transfiguration, I was kind of predicting where we're at right now. When the machine starts to run out of gas, right? It's going to start to implode. And hope one side, what could come in its place would be localism and, you know, a small is beautiful way of going about things, a sociological vision. But the other part of it is what it seems people are trying to really have anticipated and are trying to make happen is the one world government version, right? So it could go either way.
Right.
Everything I'm seeing happen, you know, we go from crisis to crisis, right?
That's why I think it's not left and right. It's overworld and underworld. No, that's a big theme for me. No,
it goes from COVID, then Ukraine, and now Ukraine out of the window, and now it's the Mideast, right? And all this, I mean, it's all going down, but you have to, and I saw this coming. I saw this coming in 2017 when I wrote that book, but I didn't think it would come so soon. But obviously, there are some players behind the scenes who know it's about the petrodollars, about the cave and everything. So they're trying to, and this is why I think they're pushing for
what's the cave?
Central bank digital currency and things like this, is because they know they're out of cards. So, but how can they maintain power after it all falls apart? And I don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist.
No, the CBDC thing is for real, right? You know, that strikes me as a big part.
City thing is real too.
What was that one?
The 15-minute city deal.
What is that?
They're already trying to get that happening.
Oh, Mike.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. What am I missing? What am I not reading, Brandon?
Well, they're trying.
Have you seen the?
Hasn't happened here yet. It will be a long time for
15-minute city.
But the idea that if you go beyond 15 minutes from where you live on a day, you start to pay a service charge.
Oh, wow.
Higher tax.
That could lead to an increase of localism.
You get penalized. Well, it's not.
That's exactly 15 minutes is the amount of fame I have. Like according to Andy Warhol.
Localism. Yeah.
No, I agree.
But that's what they're pushing for.
I believe.
Right.
I think Saudi Arabia has a test, or maybe it's just a blueprint Yeah, the Saudi, I think Saudi Arabia has like a wall it's not that wide, but it's something like 10 or 11 miles long. It's something incredible where they envision people living in there with the
It's
idea of
like an
15-minute
apartment
cities. They
building
have,
in a line. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
yep. I think they even call it the wall or something like that, where
mhm,
everything you could want is within 15 minutes. And so you never need to leave.
yeah.
It's
So,
crazy.
so Brandon, even going back, I'm thinking of our guest last week, and if people hasn't listened to it, Karen Swallow Prior, really good evangelical background, So when we were talking about like your entrance point, but when you were talking about scripture, I'm wondering, and I mentioned this last week too, that you're looking at scripture for some moral precepts, or you're trying to find
Mm,
how you should live. And I don't think what I'm going to say is in conflict with that, but I think at these types of, like Michael was saying, inflection points or whatever the word he used was, these are epical changes. Um, Last week I was mentioning, because we were talking a little bit about Owen Barfield, that he looks at these moments that for him might be moving towards what he calls final participation. Brandon, we've talked, it would be where, when Brandon Gaylord, the more he becomes Brandon, the more he finds, he's in oneness, that
mm,
um the point being, I like this image that when we go through these transitions, that history, it's not pure evolution, but any moment has its besetting sin and it's one needful thing, and he would say,
mhm,
right now, this is, one of the inklings and so forth, which doesn't mean he's right. But right now, and this I can feel it in my bones, he's right, that the besetting sin is this literalness, whether it's scripture, in the Catholic Church, it could be ritual as somehow magical, just do this kind of left brain weirdism, literalism, but when what we need is imagination, we got to think deeply on what we want our world to be. I always challenge
mm,
students, used to be in that gold leadership program, Brandon. You're probably the leader of the
mhm.
gold leadership program.
I
But I
was.
I would do, using my hero prowess, I would just do a workshop with students on leadership that, when you imagine your life in detail. So, I'm a college student and I'm studying, okay, imagine your future. When you walk out of your door, are you leaving a pet behind, like a cat or a dog? Are you with somebody else? Are you married? Are you living suburban, rural, urban? Are you living north or south? Do you have a McMansion? Is that what you want? Do you have cars? Do you have leisure time? But if you imagine your life in detail, Powys knew it's the most important for us to generate what that is. You are like manifesting it. You just start working towards it. All I ever wanted in life, when we really get down to it, when we look at money, most of us are going to choose the right thing. All I wanted was a simple house where I could pay the bills, some job that was kind of also like, where work was also like play for me. I thought if I could have some chickens in the backyard running around and a goat and a nice fence for a garden and all those things that kind of materialized. But I think we need to do that as a society too. None of us knows what they want in detail. In detail,
Mhm,
I want a city
mhm.
state. I want a more regional economy that's not a 15-minute city. So this entrance point to scripture, does it help you imagine the future in detail, or are you kind of using Christian faith to kind of ward off bad mojo? Tell me how it feels viscerally for you, what you're looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, yeah, it does. I have just a beautiful family, beautiful
You
house,
do.
great
I know your
job.
wife, Janelle. Yep.
Yeah, live 4 miles from work. I go home on lunch. I mean, I just have a great day-to-day life. And I find myself going to the Bible every day, thinking that there's no way I'm doing everything God's calling me to do. But it's just, to me, it doesn't make sense. I look at what Paul did and some of these great examples, Francis and others, and the evangelizing or seeking to just spread the good news. And I think, I don't know, is it enough to just live a good life? Is a person who's struggling because they're the victim of, say, child trafficking or whatever, are they struggling because God's going to use them for some greater purpose that I just can't foresee? Or is God saying, Brandon, I gave you 2 arms, 2 legs, and a mind and a body, go out and do something about it? And I sort of find myself questioning, not in the sense of like, am I doing enough? And I hate the idea of trying to game the system to get into heaven. So what do I need to do to be a good Christian so that I'm rewarded when God calls me home? But rather saying, is God looking at me and saying, good job? Or is he saying, get off your butt? What are you doing? There's suffering in the world. Back in college, you flew to Biloxi. Maybe that was a bit misguided, but the intention was there. Now it almost feels easy to me that the sort of day to day, go to work, go home, take care of the family kind of thing. And I can't think, looking at the examples of good Christians who've come before, I can't think that I'm possibly doing everything I could be doing. And I think that's why I get in the Bible as often as I do.
It's a really good explanation.
Well, we talked about this a little bit with Karen last week. You ever see the movie Amazing Grace?
I think
No.
I have, but when you guys described it, I guess I was probably just
It's
remembering
really good,
Amistad
but
or
there's
something.
there's this one moment. So William Wilberforce is thinking about leaving politics in the film because he got hit by God, right? All he wants to think about is God and nature and stuff. And what happens is these abolitionists come to have dinner at his house, and that they say, we heard you were thinking about leaving politics or serving God's word. God's doing the work of God. I would suggest you can do both, because I think what happens with our whatever vocation we've been given. I mean, that's the idea, right? I mean, I, if I were to go in, not that I have the skills, but to go liberate kids from child trafficking or whatever, right? I would probably be shirking my duties as a father, because this, you hear these stories about these activist parents or whatever or even pastors. What happens is they neglect their own kids, and so their own kids become problematic later in
No,
life.
that can be true in the pro-life movement, right? You're spending every day down at the abortion clinic and you're neglecting
Yeah,
your own
but
kids.
what can you do? I mean, there's that great poem by Czeslaw Milosz on angels, and how it ends with "Day breaks, another one. Do what you can," right?
Mm.
So I think that's because we always we got to do what we can, but it doesn't mean you need to do everything.
I was talking to my coworker the other day, and she's closer to your age, Mike, than mine. Let's just say that.
That's what
And
she's about 80 or something.
yeah,
Brandon never
and
misses an opportunity to slam.
she's got more hair than you, but that's okay. And she's been in Bible studies for forever, and she can she can quote scripture off the top of her head. You could say, what's Romans 8:12? And she can tell you, right? And I said, you know, what would you do if somebody theoretically was attacking your family? Oh, I'd defend my family. Okay, well, how? Well, I'd deadly force, whatever. And I said, okay, great. So we're willing to use, and me too, and we're willing to use deadly force for our own family. What if you saw somebody else being attacked and you knew that it was not a justified attack, it was some victim being attacked? And so I think you can extrapolate that out. Like, I would do whatever it takes to protect my wife and two children. Would I do the same to protect others? And aren't I shirking my duties as a Christian if I don't? I mean, doesn't Jesus say, what you do unto the least of these you did to me? I mean, how how is it, whether it's the abortion movement, whether it's child trafficking, whether it's domestic violence, how is it that good Christians can tolerate bad things happening if they have a desire to stop it from happening?
Well, the thing is, then you get to the point where you're immobilized. I mean, I always use this as an example with students. I said, my life's pretty good. It's okay. You're filling gas in your tank, right? Now, once you trace that gasoline back to the field where it came from, how many people had to die for you to get that gas in the tank?
Mm.
How many people in the Mideast were blown to pieces during whatever war, so you could have gas for $2.80 a gallon or whatever. Which it can be overwhelming, right? It can be debilitating for people. But
I feel
I
really
don't
bad
ask
about the
them. I
gas
don't
I
ask
have in
them
my
the
tank
question
right
for
now.
that reason. I ask, I'm just trying to get students just to think about anything, because we take everything for granted, and we think, look at my new iPhone. Okay, well, how many kids enslaved in Nigeria had to
Amen.
work to get cobalt for that, right? I mean, you can make yourself nuts with this kind of stuff, but I think we are given tasks to do. We don't all have the same vocation, and that's the difficult thing, is everybody has a different vocation, right? Listening, trying to discern what your own vocation is an important thing, and it's important to able to actually hear when you're getting a message to switch vocations as well, right? No one can measure up, but on the other hand, you can make yourself insane by that kind of and this is what I was these feel you could become a psychological mess by
Mhm.
but well, it becomes a kind of inverse messiah complex, you know.
I wonder too. I thought the greatest for me. I've mentioned my hero Stephen Vizinci, this Hungarian author.
You get a
But
lot of here.
it was the notion. What's that? I do. I do. It's like polytheism, right? The thing is, they're living after the incarnation. All these people, Shakespeare, like he lived. This is the new polytheism that everybody's hungry for. Everybody's doing their, they're fighting all these gods outside. I'm like, they came and they walked. But the notion of this is what led me to Berdyaev, I mentioned, like anti-consequentialism. So, Brandon, you're talking about like if we would defend our family, but then some people could extrapolate. We begin with the near at home, but anti-consequentialism would be so many people do so many evil things to try and ward off the thing they think that's going to happen, which is bad. So on the other hand, so what he proves, the great novelists prove, again, in my continual and perpetual and war to the end war with the left brain, everybody thinks the world is much more rational than it is. So Vizinci said, most of our misfortune, no, this was probably Stendhal, quoted by Vizinci, that most of our misfortunes in life come from false notions of what's actually happening to us. Therefore, to judge events sanely is a great step towards happiness. So Stendhal and so forth, his novels, they call to mind that like where we think we feel safe and where we are safe is probably diluted. What we think is going to happen in the future. We got involved again in Vietnam because we thought the domino theory of history, which is the craziest thing ever to happen. If Vietnam went communist, all of East Asia was going to go communist. So we go in there and lose half of our nation. How about we begin with, again, and when it's really close to home, but if somebody came in your house trying to shoot your two kids in Janelle, you're going to do something. But as soon as we get outside and scale a little bit, or we try to syllogize 2 steps before, we start to become immoral. Like, Kennedy's assassin said, I did it for my country. Well, did the country get a lot better? Or just don't kill the president, don't shoot abortion providers, things like that.
But I think it's Numbers says that we're supposed to treat Christians and non-Christians, and I know it's Old Testament, but we're sort of supposed to otherwise. I mean, so
thing.
minor thing, maybe not the best part, but
It's not the gospel.
I mean, let's say I don't know, like, so is it physical boundaries that limit where a Christian's supposed to take action? I mean, the lunatic shoots in a church a couple of years ago, a guy pulls a gun and kills him. Well, maybe it was just him and his wife there. And what if they had gotten out? Does he say, thank God I got out? Or does he owe responsibility to every other Christian there to protect and defend him? And if he does, where do those boundaries end? Is it the physical church? Is it at a fairground? Is it in a city? Is it in a country? I mean, I think that's kind of where I'm struggling is, where
well,
does
scale is a big thing, and again, that's my whole thing. If you go from the local to the large, so many of these otherwise moral quandaries that we solve in terms of like abstract rationalism or left-right religions of left and right, when you look at scale, you get at it, that certain things out of scale, they just become a completely different beast. I'm always waging war at this notion that this universe is inherently and objectively just so big, where imagination can tell you it can be big or small depending on where you are. And so when we get out of scale, we have to solve the world's problems and so forth, that morality, that's why these moral codes of a certain use of the Bible, they can just bring so much warfare to this world. Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. That's a pretty good scale. He thought the day was a pretty good time. Eckhart Tolle would say the now is a pretty good time. With it, if we work in the now, living in the present moment, that's a pretty good one. Jesus, he had some regard for the day, as does Pope Francis, like one day at a time. But once we start predicting out, we're just statisticians can say we're really, really likely to be wrong. Then we start, using fancy logic to justify evil. So keep things close to home, keep things close to the now and the day, and we're going to have a lot less violence. So most of the violence in the world comes from people who are using just false notions of what's going on and a false knowledge that if you do this, this will happen. right? Look at every
That
quagmire,
makes sense.
right? Every quagmire we start. If we bomb Iraq back into the Stone Age for women's rights, for Laura Bush. Heavy. Brandon, let's talk
Yeah,
about
Sound of
education.
Freedom
Yeah,
today.
I got to
Go
see
for
that. I
it.
might watch it tonight.
You haven't
Michael, you
seen it?
didn't know. No, I haven't seen it. Yeah, I
No,
think I'd like it. Yeah. Have you seen it, Michael?
see what?
Sound of Freedom.
Sound of Freedom.
No, no, I haven't. But
Oh, come on. You guys got to go
That's the
watch
movie. That's the movie. I know. I want to watch it. That's the movie, Michael. In the summer, people were saying the air conditioning
I
was
know what
going
it, I
off.
know what it is.
Oh, okay.
I know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, go see it in the theaters because he said that the company tried to ban it for 5 years. They had to wait to get it out, and you can get bootleg copies, but when you see it in the theater, it supports the blah blah blah. Anyway.
Okay. There was another, just to go back, it was a movie I watched a month ago when we had your friend, Mr. Kikasola on, Michael, about film.
That was
He
a
had
while
mentioned a
ago.
movie about a deaf drummer called The Sound of Something. And it's a Christian movie. It's about a guy who lost his hearing. And that's a profound movie about conversion. You don't have anybody watch that, about how God moves through grace to turn people towards others and so forth. But education. Michael's a
Go for it.
Waldorf teacher. Brandon, you've thought a lot about education. I think you went, that was your post, your graduate work was in education. What's wrong with the schools?
sir.
What do you think can fix them?
How much time do you have?
What's right
Scrap
with
them
you?
all. Scrap them all the public schools. I think that I think there's so much inherently wrong with them, even if they're performing to the level they're supposed to. I think what they're supposed to perform and achieve is not what we're expecting from a society. I drive around here. It's Friday today. I drive around here and there's no school on Fridays,
That's cool.
and I'm like,
Really?
I like it. Yeah.
yeah, but you like it because you kept your kid home
I'm
one day
saying-
a week every year. Uh, but I look at it and I go, okay, so we have really awful outcomes. State of Oregon just recently said you don't need to be able to master reading, writing, or math to graduate from high school. So we have these like abysmal outcomes. So the best thing to do is to cut 20% of the week so that you can go and
I'm
be
all
on
for
TikTok
it.
longer.
That's why we're talking education. I'm all for it. Less school, less school.
I
The
think
thing is the
you-
right amount, right?
You're
With
all
schooling,
for it
yeah.
because
Tell
no,
me.
they don't think you're all for it because you supplemented your kids' income with experiential learning at home, which is brilliant.
No, I think
But when it's sit
learning
at
in
home on
square
Fridays
rooms,
and be on
depending on what we
TikTok,
mean by school. So life is, again, the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. Everything can be teaching you. And so
yeah, but
some
it doesn't.
subjects,
These kids are not getting it. They're not getting it.
I
Though,
get
Mike.
that. We're not saying close the schools right now, and Michael's going to have a lot to say, but like schools, sitting in square rooms with people your own age under fluorescent lights, the medium of schooling, the liturgy of schooling, it's proven to be a little more religion than real, but it seems to work. Meeting every day in 45-minute segments with people your own age, moving through a math year. Seems to work pretty well. Learning a language, getting exposure every day. It seems antithetical to a deep learning of history or English, literature or that. Science should be done much more outside, some of the practical stuff. So certainly less time. I'm not saying less time being educated or engaging in education. We need a lot less schooling. We need longer summers. I would die on that hill. Yeah. Because they're wasting so much of the time.
Less school.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that assumes that it's being supplemented by some other kind of learning. I mean, I taught.
We need a revolution or a
I
regeneration.
yeah, I only taught in urban schools, and this is not a criticism of urban areas or parents, students, or teachers there, but a lot of what I saw was if my students weren't in school, they were not learning. They were on video games, they were TikTok, they were playing basketball, which is great. There's some value there, I suppose, but it's not like they're out wandering through the forest and talking about William Blake and why Mike thinks he's the greatest poet of all time. It's just if there's nothing to fill the gap, then there's nothing to fill the gap. And I think what's filling the gap is not working. It needs to be scrapped.
I don't disagree. Michael Martin.
Well, I don't know how to fix this, but it's a problem of culture. We don't have. I mean, when I was teaching in the inner city, most of those students, and this is in college. When I was teaching college, weren't prepared and weren't interested in being prepared. Not all of them, but quite. But there was not and you compare that. In fact, a friend of mine was teaching at a inner city place in Seattle, but most of the student body were children of immigrants, like from Eritrea or China or wherever it happened to be, right? But their families were serious about education, and those kids went to school and they learned, even though they were so poor, right? Um, and you even look at demographics. I mean, one of the one minority that gets ripped on for education is our Asians, right? And the reason being is because education is being educated is the in China, Chinese culture for sure, is the ideal of the Confucian ideal, right? Is to be educated and to know, to be well informed. Um, I don't know how to change our culture into one that is that like that. And I'll tell you what, in my 25 years of teaching college, I've seen, and the kids who come to college now are not only are they uninformed. The only thing they're informed about is social justice bullshit. But they can't, generally they can't think, and have never been asked to think. And the thing is, when the way I teach, even when I teach English or writing, I teach like a philosopher, because I want them to think, and that's what to consider things, and actually to not the old fashioned college professor thing of challenging their assumptions. Well, you have to have an assumption to challenge it, but to push them to think, is for a lot of them, when you see them finally, the light goes on and they're like, wow, I mean, I'm allowed to say this in the college. Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, this is so tough, and it comes and I don't know how to do this. There has to, you have to have enough of the culture, enough people in the culture they have to think that education is valuable for it to reach a tipping point. And right now we don't have that. So what we have instead are subcultures like the homeschooling movement, for instance, or other kinds of subcultures. And this is, we talked about with Karen last week, and she was talking about precisely this, where, and we've talked about it before, like the idea of a hedge school, because you don't want to have your child educated in the system of.
Describe a hedge school to Brandon if you haven't read your Irish history, Brandon, which I thought was a precursor to inviting you on, but I think you failed. Go, Michael.
Well, that's like the hedge schools where they had in Ireland under British rule, and the Irish families did not want their kids learning British history or British religion. So they had these kind of clandestine schools that would meet not really in hedges, but in barns or something. And the parents, and this is poor people, right? This is not wealthy people. The parents would pitch in to pay or feed the schoolmaster, who would give them a solid education. But it was cultural, right? And you see this with Frederick Douglass, right, in his narrative of the slave, right, where it means something and it's valuable. And we live in a culture right now, education-wise, that, as you pointed out, Brandon, tells us knowing math or anything is not important. In fact, it's racist.
Racist,
right?
Yeah. And it's those Asians who can do the math that are racist.
This is a way to keep.
What's that? Yeah.
This is the way to keep the population fat and stupid, right?
Yeah.
And that's why our buddy Ivan Illich, I mean, I agree with him. School is basically a waste of time. It's inefficient. And I know this from homeschooling my kids, because homeschooling is so much more efficient than parochial schools or public schools.
Yeah, Brandon, he would show that if you had somebody, right. If you're politically engaged, he could teach illiterate Mexicans, to read in 2 weeks, when you want something. Well, this is all Kairos and Chronos again, go back. School is based on, buzzers, routinization, and so forth. But there's another lilies of the field, birds of the air type of learning that's, Michael's pointing to, that when people want to learn something, they can learn it so fast. So so that's the thing. You can do it when you get it. You can learn it so quick. The other one is that it's been proven that what you learn in this other model of schooling, where I think you think people should spend more time, is they're not learning the content. It's the liturgy, right? The medium is the message. They're learning. They can't name 20 of the 50 states, but they know that learning, or they think they know that learning, comes in these weird segments of 45 minutes with people their own age under fluorescent lighting, things like that.
Right. So couple thoughts. So one, I think the micro school movement is very, very strong.
Say more
And
about it.
micro school is sort of what Michael was describing is just small schools. I mean, it might be a retired teacher or whatever who's just putting themselves out there. They're going to teach 5 or 10 students, and that's it. And they're going to do it from their home. They're going to rent a space in a church, wherever. Very strong. I'm working with a local church that here in Arizona that we're going to be starting a Christian school because we've got one in town and they have a waiting list. And the schools here are so absolutely awful, in my opinion, that something has to be done. The other thought that I had too is, the Islamic schools from hundreds of years ago, the way that they used to do Eastern education was people would seek out different imams that they wanted their children to learn from, and they would appeal to that imam. And then you would sit, if you're one of these students, you would sit with 8, 10, 12 other students of various ages in a circle with the imam, and you would all talk about philosophy, astrology, religion, math, science, whatever. And so you learn from various different people. The way we have it now is just, I think, stupid. And it's absolutely insane. And I've applied for jobs and where students are taught to track the speaker, meaning your eyes follows the speaker wherever they go. You ask to use the restroom and you are usually told no. All these silly things that just very basic education theory tells you undermines any chance of learning. If a student needs to use the bathroom, they're not going to learn Pythagorean theorem. I mean, if they don't know it already, it's just not going to happen.
My attention is elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, I was thinking about this the other night. I taught in a charter school for a number of years, and I love my charter schools, the good and bad with them. But, to get funding for a charter school, you have to teach, I think it's one day over the median number of days in a school year or in a calendar year. So you've got to teach something like 190 days that you have to be in session. I'm like, okay, so if high school, say, is 4 years and you have to be there for a minimum of half the year, can we just do it in 2 years and go full year and speed this up, get kids graduated 2 years early, maybe get them an internship with various different trades, find out what they want to do for a living, what interests them. But it's a whole system. It's a process. School is not about free thinking. It's about conformity. It's even more so post-COVID. I taught pre, during, and post-COVID. And, when I taught my first year before COVID, I was teaching Socratic seminar style, and it was fantastic. I had students, I'd write on the board a resolution like the United States has a responsibility to people who enter our country illegally. And students had to pick a side that they wanted to be on that argument. They had to research it, and then they sat across from each other and they had to, it was Robert's rules, and they had to be respectful, and they argued their point. And it was fantastic. And then COVID hit and everything changed.
Yep.
And I think that the race out of education as is one of the quickest things that's out there. And I think this LGBTQ, you can be whatever you want, furry movement is just, I think, adding fuel to the fire of people who are leaving the public school movement. It's by design. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. The war on children, I think, is the biggest war in this country. And I think public education is where it's being fought.
I agree. Interesting. Brandon, you bring up a subject. We'll give one more subject. Anything you'd like to talk to with, Michael Martin? Some people never get a chance to talk to him in their whole life. Oh, let me show you something I'm eating. Grape pie. Did you ever have that, Mike? It's a Michael. It's a local Rochester thing.
Grape pie. No, we don't have that.
Yeah, it's hard because you have to skin all these concrete. What's that?
Have you had ground cherry pie before?
No, that's a Buffalo. I mean, that's a Michigan.
Ground cherry is actually in the tomato family, but they're really little, kind of a golden brownish color. Not the most appealing looking thing, but they make the greatest pie. I
thought it had to do with the prevalence of cherries in Michigan up near Traverse City and so forth. Okay.
Nope.
Interesting.
So, question for you too. Then, I've grown kind of. I love my Catholic faith. I don't really like the modern day Catholic Church. I don't like the personal preference. I don't like the very well lit churches that are loud and there's no pews and it just. I like my churches.
You're a red trap.
I like my churches dark and solemn and quiet.
Yeah, like I said, you're a red trap. That's cool.
The pews uncomfortable.
Really cool.
The Catholic Church, as I think everybody knows, is shedding numbers. In 5-10 years, where do you two think the church will be, or what do you think is up next for the church?
I think
As you
the
see it.
church is headed the same place education is headed. I think they're both in a state of implosion. And I think, well, I think it's an opportunity, and I hope it happens, where the power is taken away from whether it's the state in the case of education, or the Vatican and the state in the case of the church, where it's taken away from them. They might not know it's been taken away from them for a long time, but I think what we're seeing in the things we've been talking about today, taking just, finally ignoring the power structure and talk about acting locally and seeing what needs to be done right in front of us. I mean, it's not like I don't have to write a manifesto to get the Vatican to shape up or anything. I can just, or education, I can just do it where I am, or start where I am and start to circle up that way. And it's the same thing with, we run a biodynamic CSA here. And as I mentioned, we had somebody pick up 6 bushels of vegetables today. But you see the same thing in that aspect of the current state of human civilization, where most people get their food from Walmart or wherever, the big box grocery chains. But there's also a lot of people who buy locally, right? Who, in fact, the people who came here today, our friends, we get raw milk from them since we sold our cow, and they get all these vegetables from us, and there's kind of an exchange this way. In fact, even this morning, I went to visit my friend. His name's Barry, and he's a potter, so I call him Barry Potter. Wow. And I went over to his place because last time I saw him, I gave him a jar of honey, and he said, "Hey, come over. I got some blackberry bushes for you." So I went to get the blackberry bushes, and I brought him a bottle of mead. And he gave me a whole bunch of blackberry mush.
This is potlatch. This is surplus. Yeah.
And then he gave me, actually, it was really cool. He gave me
Then he gave you one of his wives.
A coffee mug that he just made. Yeah. But
he gave you like 50 of his slaves.
It escalated.
But that kind of stuff, it subverts the structure.
It does. Yeah.
And the thing is, it subverts that phony structure that we have paid allegiance to for whatever, just be out of habit. And then you realize this is what a real parish is. That a parish, so often in Catholic parishes is, there are these big, and that's what Dorothy Day called it, the long loneliness, right?
Wasn't Addison Hodges great on that, Michael, when we had him on?
Yeah, but then when you come, I'm dealing with Barry and these people, that's what a parish is. Mm-hmm. That's what it's supposed to be, right? It really is acting local. And then the people, now Barry's a little older than I am, and his kids are all grown, but the other people, they have younger kids, they homeschool them, they're part of this subversive country network we have out here. But they also, in fact, Bonnie, just before I came in here, I had lunch, and she's been making fermented vegetables. So these women swap fermented vegetables and stuff. So you have all this really healthy food because you don't want to leave it to somebody else anymore. Mm-hmm. You got to, and I think it's the same thing with education and faith. We have to. Well, what's going to come is it gets to a point where you get tired of outsourcing your power in those situations to people who don't deserve it.
Yeah, I was going to say in New York State, that's an interesting point. In New York State, to be a history teacher, and my bachelor's degree is in history, and then my master's is in history education. But to be a history teacher, I think you have to take 2 classes in college.
Only.
Like, so what are you actually learning? Yeah, it's absolutely crazy to me. And I think there's a certain sense of empowerment that comes. I tell people all the time, we're homeschooling our kids 100%. And the socialization and this, that, and the other. And what if they're not going to learn?
Funny word.
And I said, look, yeah, my wife and I have 4 degrees between us, and nobody's going to teach our kids the knowledge or love on them the way that they need to be loved on better than she and I are. But I think there's a lot of power in that, and that's education. I think that's going to continue. I think the fracturing of public education is a huge one, and they have no way of combating it. I think COVID was really what brought it about,
Mhm.
because then they said you can do education online, and it's like, okay, then great. You
And
can,
then
as
the
a
parents
student
saw what
now,
they were
I
teaching
think
them.
it's actually, yeah, I think it's really exciting time to be a student right now because you can take classes from professors at Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, all these amazing universities from the comfort of your home, which is fantastic. Whereas before you had neighborhood schools, which maybe weren't very well funded. But then I think for religion too, and Mike, I think you would love this. If you were to visit me, Mr. Sauter, in Arizona, and you should, I'll take you out to. We have
To the
a
Grand
church here
Canyon?
called Cowboy.
Grand Canyon?
We have a church here called Cowboy Church,
Wow.
and I think you would like something like that. Basically, people bring their horses trailered to a dirt parking lot where they unload them and they go into mass, and then they go out and they ride afterward, and they all sort of gather and have communion together, and it's fantastic. And we have
Yeah, yeah.
10 different kinds of churches in our small little city, so I think that there's a sense of empowerment and then meeting people where they are that's really kind of
And
incredible.
you have some of the culture again that, like, my new job, it has the migrant churches. I kind of oversee them for the diocese, and there's life there, and there's much more, as opposed to this kind of antiquated. I was laughing at you when you're talking about these uncomfortable pews and so forth. But the vibrant churches are ones that come from seemingly like mestiza blood under the patronage of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and they look very different than what the rad trads are kind of go. But I need to say this in addition is that I don't think we talked about it once, Michael, but we'll have to do like a three show series on it. But I have a feeling that we won't find the real church, which I would call religionless church, not Bonhoeffer's religionless Christianity, because that's just saying like religionless religion, Christianity. It's a religion. In France, or before, you didn't know you belonged to a religion called Christianity. You belonged to the church. The nation state told you, oh, you belong to a religion. It's called Christianity. It's kind of like Islam, but it's different. It's kind of like Judaism, which is a nationality in time, but it's different, right? Then we internalize this weird stuff. Religionless Christianity is a religionless religion. A religionless church is something, but that's a word salad. But I don't think we're going to be able to do it unless I almost think we could look at what a rejuvenated form of education looks like and a rejuvenated form of economics looks like, right? So Michael will hear me talking about Rudolf Steiner's social threefolding. That if we take an initiative in what medicine needs to look like in this time, post-COVID, for-profit medicine, what's wrong with it? What can we learn, honestly, from natural healing and so forth, from indigenous traditions? Let's do a mashup. If we work on that, we're inversely working on this other system, which is creating the space for what the church is supposed to look like in our time. And if we work on a new kind of federated politics, whether we need more decentralization in America, that's my thing, or a larger Congress, I have no idea. But if we get the political realm, working on the themes of liberty again, then that church that's being born in our time, the new in the shell of the old, because this one's dying. I think we have to be working on all fronts. It's like whether it's Alice Through the Looking Glass or Alice in Wonderland. When you're going down one path and you arrive at the real path, we got to be looking away, and the thing we need grows. But if we do try to think of what the new church should look like, it's going to be really tyrannical, political, and like weird, because it's going to be some power obsessed person's brain, I think.
Well, I think, but actually, all that we've been saying here is essentially these are all the parts, but it's the West where Christendom is dying,
Yeah.
right? We're the shadow of Christendom, and that's why I think, like the EU, John Milbeck likes to point out that the symbol for the EU with the stars was based on the Book of Revelation and the Virgin. Yeah, but it seems like a demonic parody to me.
Yeah.
But I think with all that you just mentioned, Mike, I mean, comes up a lot with me these days, where people talk, well, we have to get the church to do this. Whoa. What do you mean by that those two words, the church?
We are the church.
Well, now it depends. I mean, you talk to different people. I talk to an
true.
Orthodox, you're going to want to answer. You get talk to a, hyper evangelical Protestant, you're going to get a different answer. You talk to a Catholic, you're going to get a different answer. And and herein lies the problem.
Hmm.
And I don't, and I think in almost all those instances, usually the answers you get are some kind of glittering generality that sounds pretty, but it doesn't mean anything. And
Well,
it's
Well,
doesn't
yeah.
doesn't
Go
Paul
ahead,
define
Brandon.
the church?
who, what?
Hey, Paul,
Doesn't Paul define the church? Doesn't he say
give
that,
us his
like Mike said,
definition
that,
as you see it. Yeah.
that doesn't Paul say that we are the church, a bride adored for Christ?
Oh, I would say again, the church is that entity that takes its nourishment from the Eucharist, in one sense. And not that Eucharist is infinitely variable, but again, I think it's this organic thing. It's a hydra-headed beast, this one in many, and I think it could probably, Soloviev of short history, the Antichrist, or Olivier Clément's, when a Pope, I think Pope St. John Paul II, tasked all these people to write about papal primacy. This notion of the Protestant Church being the charism of Paul, the Eastern Church having the charism of John, and the Catholic Church having the charism of St. Peter. That Paul was right on circumcision against Peter. So, when we start to see that, there's possibilities of where this church, it's poetic, Michael, and I'm not saying that it's anything, but like, Michael, how do you resonate with some of those things that are put forward? Can we get any traction with those?
I don't know. I mean, I always like. I mean, what John Paul was drawing on there was Soloviev, right?
Yeah, right.
Um, and but I don't. I just think I don't think we know what the church is. I think we know what the church is, um, and this is the problem. I mean, for us growing up in the Catholic tradition, right? It's so easy for us to conflate this idea of the church with the hierarchy, right? The church says we have to do that. Well,
But
it's
doesn't
not
Illich
fair.
help us there? Like, I think, and sorry to interject, that the hierarchy, it just works for me. Like, that's the skeletal structure. And again, people do conflate it, but it's on us. The skeletal structure of the church, which carried the gospels, like as if in its rib cage, for 2,000 years. It's necessarily, so he would call that as the church as it, but it's skeletal, like the human body, the flesh and the blood, and the fact that if I rip a hair off my arm or here, where do I end? Some of that mystery about the church. That's the church as she. Um, and again, I think we've been given some pretty fructifying metaphors and images, poetic ones, to work with in our time. I don't feel as out in the desert as you do, but I don't want to pretend that I sound like I know what's coming. It's very
Well, I
Marian.
don't think I'm out in the desert.
Yeah,
I'm just saying I
yeah,
don't think nobody really knows, and nobody.
yeah. I don't disagree. Yeah, yeah. Brandon.
And there's
Yeah,
certainly
I
no
okay.
competition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know either. All I know is I love, like I said, my dark churches. We went to Italy, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, and it was just fantastic. We got back, and like the day we got back, we're like, okay, when we retire, we're going to retire to Italy. We're going to go to Florence and get a little condo
Oh,
and
I
just
think
call
you
it a
need to
day.
talk to Guido Preparata. We'll have him on. I'm going to call him
Yeah,
right now. Yeah,
fair
every
enough.
small
And
town is being shut down. This thing he says the biggest thing in Italy is, how you have to sign a code to check your email, to get another code to check this. He said in Italy, that layer of like shit that's being burying us right now, he goes, it's like 5 times as more powerful. To get on a train, you need to send a code to your wife who sends you a code to do this.
geez.
And then finally a QR code comes up and you get the train or something.
Well, then we're going to hang on to Italy in our minds the way
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah.
But we loved just, we had no plans when we were there. And so when we were in Florence, which was amazing, and then Rome, we were just walking around and popping into these old churches. And I feel like the church that I grew up in, the old church where as a young kid, if I said something and I wasn't supposed to be speaking, my grandfather would slap me on the wrist and say, we don't talk in church. Like that church itself is dying. And I think
Yeah, you
that
could recreate that in your
the
your Elks Club or something if you want to. I just don't think that's the
right,
church. Create the same atmosphere
I
of
think
like
the
authority and fear.
cowboy
Yeah,
right. I think the cowboy church idea is
yeah.
going to
I like
take
that
off,
one.
not literally, but I think that the church meeting people where they are.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
I
good
think for the
language.
longest time, the Catholic Church and really all churches were okay with people coming in and doing church for 45 to 60 minutes a week and then going home. And people are not willing to do that now. And I think the church needs to meet people where they are the same way education needs to do that. And so
Right.
I think it's going to just have to adjust. I'm not sure what it looks like, but it's going to have to adjust.
Brandon, it's been really great having you on the Regeneration podcast. Any final words? Do you have Can you tell us all about your books and all your different websites and things?
No books, no websites.
You're just
Only
a
book
guy.
is I'm just the guy who spends not enough time in the Bible. So that's
A
pretty
guy I
simple
met
man.
in Biloxi, and who I've been fortunate to keep in touch with ever since. So,
Mike,
Brandon, thanks so much.
you blew my mind in Biloxi. That and the whole Carol Quigley thing and the conversations we had, and so I'm glad to be on and glad to have a conversation. Michael Martin, thank you so much for chatting with me. Very nice meeting you, sir.
Yeah, Michael. So
You blew my mind in Biloxi. Is that the title of one of those Treehouse books?
yeah,
The Johnny Cash song.
or Jimmy Buffett, right? Down around
Rest in
Biloxi.
peace.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everybody, and thanks our listeners for listening to the Regeneration